Hello, I am so excited. We've got Abbie Janssen here, and Abbie used to be an investigator who would go in as the regulator and deal with companies who'd stuffed up and caused psychosocial injuries and all that. And now what she does is she helps companies not get in that spot or get out of that spot well when they're in that spot. Abbie, how come you're so passionate about helping prevent psychosocial injuries in the workplace and helping businesses prevent the massive fallout that happens when that happens at their workplace?
Yeah, it's been a huge change, but I think when I was working as an inspector, I spent a lot of time speaking with people who had been injured and seeing the effect that it had on them made me want to make things better for everybody. And I also have seen a lot about how it affects the business as well. Negative outcomes in terms of turnover, absenteeism, having to continually be employing people. It just doesn't make sense for anybody. So we wanted to educate people about how to make their workplace better and safer so that everybody's got better outcomes.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And what I get excited about is I know so many businesses who need someone to come in and go, if you keep doing this, you're going to end up at Fair Work and it's going to cost you 10 grand or 20 grand. And there's a better way. And so I've got a feeling that people need you at a lot less than it costs to go to Fair Work
Absolutely.
and a lot less than it costs to have a regulator come and visit you and gently tap you on the shoulder. So when you see companies in, say, allied health or NDIS, right? So you've from speech therapy all the way through to people turning up at people's houses and helping them do their washing. What are the dangers that people don't talk about when it comes to looking after your staff, making sure your staff are not about to have some massive injury that then you're going to be held accountable for as a director?
Yeah, I think predominantly in that sort of area, we've always focused on that physical side of things. So it's like everyone knows to do a risk assessment, make sure there's not a dog running around, and make sure that there's a fire extinguisher, those sorts of things when you're getting people into your house. But I think it's the unseen things. It's are there other people in the house who might be bullying your worker while they're on site? Is there somebody who's making them uncomfortable and making unwanted sexual advances to them? There's so many different ways that people can be exposed to harm. And when people are working in isolation like that, also another hazard, they don't necessarily know or remember how to raise concerns. So that really creates an issue. Just being separated, not having a physical site to go to, not seeing managers and supervisors regularly so that you can debrief and just say, oh my God, this really weird thing happened to me today when I was at such and such's house. So I think there's lots of different things that we can put in place to try and reduce these risks and make everyone feel safer at work.
Yeah, got it. Okay. And I guess what it comes down to is the consequence of not having our people safe at work is just off the charts. Because let's think about this. Is it all right if I ask some really hard questions? Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. Something that I find baffling and bewildering is that people will send, say, a 23-year-old physio or occupational therapist. Lovely, young, she's straight out of uni. She doesn't really know how to assert herself too well. She's wanting to please people and keep them happy with her. She feels insecure. They'll send her to the house of some, I don't know, 45-year-old guy who's got behavior issues. And she doesn't even know what she's walking into. And I'm like, how the hell does that work at scale? You do the maths. There must be some horrendous things going on that no one's talking about. And I'm like, I don't even know how you get around that without stopping offering home support. Like, how the heck do you make that 23-year-old safer? Even the fact that I'm saying safer cautiously, no, bugger it. How about you make that actually safe? What do we need to do in a situation like that?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, not every 40-year-old gentleman is going to be a danger, but we obviously need to plan for the worst case scenario, that's me all the way, all about worst case scenario. It's really about having a look and doing some questions over the phone. Who else is going to be there? What's the entry and exit like? Is there a staircase? You need to be able to plan what that looks like. There should be some kind of personal duress alarm or some kind of check out process. There should be, and if it is a first visit and if it is a brand new person, then we should be looking at maybe doing 2-up visits so that person feels safe and secure. If it is a first time client, maybe every first time client gets a 2-up visit, and then moving forward, once that assessment's being done and we know that person's going to be safe, then we can put in place some lower controls as well to help support that person when they're out there.
Okay. And I guess also maybe setting up so that the client, they've got another person with them, that sort of stuff. And then she turns up and all the best, everything they had over the phone, it just hasn't happened. Oh, sorry, they couldn't come and all that stuff. So in she goes, wanders in, and she's out of her depth and she doesn't even know it. And I'm like, honestly, like, how is this even possible? So you can put all the things in place, or you can be committed to an outcome. So 2 people going for that first visit, great. I'm pretty sure that's not going to be funded. So
Probably not.
that's right. So the NDIS margins don't even let that company do that without losing money. So we got a problem there. First visit goes, well, great. Someone's psychosocial issues were not an issue that day, but they were a week later when they forgot to take their medication. Abbie, being real, how on earth are leaders in these companies supposed to navigate this? Sure, they can put some things in place, but what are we missing that we could be doing if we just
Got a little more creative. Look, we'd like to be able to solve the social problems of the world, but it's around setting expectations really early on. So if during those first initial onboarding calls with the client, hey, we've got really strict policies and procedures around the behaviour that's exhibited towards our employees. There's really strict criteria for that. We'll end your service if you step out of line. And following through on those sorts of things as well. I know it's easy to say for me, don't take on the client who is going to be a risk, but there are ways to mitigate those risks. And if the person's not going to behave appropriately and they have obviously full control of their own behaviours, then they're electing to not take your service. If you support your employees, they'll feel empowered to leave at the right time before a more serious injury occurs. And the cost of losing that one client is probably still going to be less than the cost of going through either a work cover claim or being prosecuted in court if you're found to have been negligent in your health and safety obligations.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also love what you're saying about train that 23-year-old staff member. Train her to know when to step in the door and when not to. Train her to know when to hit that alarm that you provided and when not to. Train her to make sure that she's sitting so the door's behind her. That level and train her that even set the expectation with her. If you don't walk out of at least 6 sessions in your first year of being here, it means you're doing unsafe things.
Yeah.
That's
Don't put yourself in that situation as well. There is obviously an obligation on the person because they're in that moment. So they still need to be aware of what's going on around them. And that does come back to some training things, that situational awareness when you're walking through a house. Where are the doors? Is there anyone in that door? Is the door closed? Is there something else going on? If you just get that feeling, that sense that something's not quite right, be empowered to feel like it's okay to leave. Walk out the door, say, I really need to make a phone call. I've just got to check, or I've left something in the car that I needed. Head back out to the car, make a phone call to your supervisor and say, hey, I don't feel safe here. Something's not quite right. And feel empowered to be able to drive away from that space.
Yeah, good stuff, Abbie. Okay, so that's a very real thing. And I think that there's an unbelievable amount of unreported incidences that are happening. Now, what you do is you help companies after there's been an issue, a significant one. And it could be that, it could be a workplace bullying issue. Okay, so what are the things that directors could be doing so that they never have to phone you, Abbie? What are some of the things that, aside from the headline stuff that everyone knows to do, I have policies at work, follow them, document the stuff you're doing. What are the little things that you're like, my goodness, if I was the director of a occupational therapy company, or if I was the director of a home care company, what are the things that you'd be doing that others don't think to do?
I think one of the key things that people really forget to do is to talk to their employees, especially in that really when people are going out to their houses and so they're quite remote, they're quite isolated. I think there's not always enough touching base with them to see how they're going.
Yep.
And I think particularly there's some of those big organizations that have grown quickly and they don't have necessarily that middle management sort of level where there's a supervisor in between the director and that sort of thing. And so they don't feel like employees are not going to proactively call you and say, hey, something happened today. That's, like you say, completely unreported. so many things are so just not reported through. But if you've got someone who's proactively checking in on the employees, I think that really breaks down that barrier, and it makes it feel like there is a safe space to raise concerns when something goes wrong.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then what would you suggest to say, can I create another scenario if that's all right? Because I work with a lot of people and these are all de-identified, etc. But one of the ones I hear a lot is I tried to give feedback to my staff member. They decided to make it a complaint. And suddenly we've got a nuclear meltdown happening over here. I was just trying to give feedback. It's yeah, but there's a couple of things in play. One, you employed the wrong person because you had rubbish recruitment processes. Two, when you onboard them, you made them feel like a king or a queen instead of letting them know they're part of a bigger system. It's not all about them. And then three, what, you waited till they stuff up before you give any feedback. How's that going to
Yeah.
what are the things that we need to be aware of as directors when it comes to dealing with the whole workplace mental health, workplace bullying, workplace whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. I have absolutely seen that in the past where people are getting feedback about their performance or whatever it is, how they're dressing inappropriately, whatever it is. But it comes back to that falls under reasonable management behavior. So if you can demonstrate that you have not been rude to them, that you are treating them respectfully while you're having these conversations, then you're going to be in the clear for those sorts of things. It's really around then, did you leave it too late to have the conversation? Was there, and it goes back to what I was saying before about those touch bases. Are you touching in with people regularly? And that might not be a full sit down one-on-one meeting every week, but it might be a supervisor giving a phone call and being, how's your week been? Is there anything I need to know? Anything you're having difficulty with? Hey, I realized that you were a little bit longer at this person's house or you weren't there for the amount allotted hours. What was going on there? And fleshing out those things before they turn into it's the end of the month and you've cut 15 minutes off Mr. Jones's hours every day of the month. So what happened there? Why are you doing that? So it's really about having those conversations as things arise rather than building it up and having a bigger conversation, because people feel then they get their defenses up. And that's when it becomes that back and forth around, I'm not being supported and now you're bullying me. So it's about being on the forefront and making sure that you're having those conversations in real time so that it's not a surprise for people when it gets to that point. There's also a bit of upskilling that's needed. People do, from what I've seen, some of the younger generation, they communicate differently. Now we're all on phones and texting and things like that. So sometimes it might be just sending a text message instead of phone calling. It might be, but find the best way to communicate with that person. It's going to be the best, and upskill so that they know what's expected of them, that they've got some more skills to draw on.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And what are some of the sort of the crazy stories that didn't end up on a current affair, but they're still pretty crazy, where you look at, say, within this type of industry, where you look at it and be like, oh, instead of that explosion happening and that director being sued, they could have done this one thing. What are some examples that at least they're public knowledge or something you're allowed to talk about, where you're like, here's specific steps they could have taken in that circumstance?
Look, I did have a really big case where there was a situation where someone went off work because they were allegedly being bullied, and it just dragged on for such a long time. And that the workplace were worried about intervening in terms of reviewing what the complaint was, because they didn't want to make the person's mental health worse. But by not reviewing it, they were making the person's mental health worse because it felt like they were being ignored. So I think the takeaway from that is just act on something. Once you get information, you need to really act on it, because delaying those sorts of things makes it worse for everybody. It's not nice for the person who's making the complaint. It's awful and just has somebody else's career up in limbo for the person that they're complaining about. So just act on things really quickly is the takeaway, I think.
Okay. Be fast to act. It's funny because I can imagine how that person would have been like, oh, I'll hesitate to act. I don't want to make it a bigger thing than it needs to be. It's like, all they've done there is kick that can down the road. And we've all done that.
Yeah.
Like because human nature is to be optimistic and be like, no one who's not optimistic starts a business. Otherwise, why the hell would you do it? It's nuts. Okay, like just put your house on the line and work 60 hours a week. What could go wrong? You have to be optimistic. So it's natural that you'd be assuming this will get better, this will get sorted. They're mature people, but the reality is it generally won't. So a lot of the time people use the word monitoring. Oh, we're monitoring. No, we're not. We're ignoring.
Yeah.
Let's imagine you were say 23 yourself, right? And let's imagine that you take the director hat off for a moment and be a staff member. Let's imagine you're going to be a staff member going into a difficult workplace, okay? Conflict in the workplace, poor management practices, yet that's where you are, okay? What are some of the things that you would do to adjust how you act in that workplace?
Look, I've always been pretty vocal, so I like to call things out if I see inappropriate behavior. I'm not saying that I'm going to be like, oh, what did you do that for, right in front of everybody, but taking that person aside and saying, was that okay? Do we think that there was a better way to approach that? But that's easy for me to say. I'm pretty outspoken, so so that's great. But I think you can still always there's always one person that I think that you can go to and use that person as your avenue to raise issues, leverage what you can in that sort of situation. I mean,
That's amazing what you're saying. There's always one person. I think back to when I was 23, I was in a workplace that was a bit shonky, if I'm honest. It wasn't ideal, but there was one person I could be like, hey, what do I do here? Here's what the boss said, but I don't think that's going to play out well.
yeah.
And because he was in his 50s, he'd be like, oh, maybe you need to approach it this way. I'd be like, wow, I'd never thought of that. Okay. So yeah, you're right. There are those people who are resources, and it's like someone who's new to the workforce. They need to work out who those resources are and tap into it. That makes sense. And let's say you're a director of a company. Let's imagine you've got 50 employees. Let's pick out something like, say, support worker business. Okay. Support workers going to people's homes. Okay. Because this is applicable to so many different types of businesses. But pretend it's support workers going to people's homes. You've got 50 employees. Most of them will never come into the office. The office is probably only tiny anyway. And you're trying to manage these people going to clients' places. What are some of the things you'd put in place that others wouldn't have thought of? Yes, they've thought of the policies, they've thought of the check-ins, they've thought of the texts. What would you put in place to make sure that that environment is not going to cause you to end up at Fair Work or in front of a regulator?
I'm a big fan of feedback, so I would put in place something like a quick every month or every however often, a quick text, maybe like a text, how are you doing at work? And it's 3 questions, tick the buttons or whatever it is, or an email that said, have you felt like going to work every day? Or just to get a bit of a sense about how people are feeling about work. Have you encountered any issues this month? And just have that go to senior leadership, me as the director, and say maybe like a HR or a OTNS person, so that data can be looked at and we can track any sort of changes or issues that are coming up for people.
Wow, that's actually really clever. Why am I treating that like a revelation? It's so obvious when you say it, isn't it?
It doesn't need to be onerous, just because I've worked in places where you get once a year, you get a survey. It takes 40 minutes to complete, and then they take a whole year analyzing the results, and it feels like nothing happens. But I feel like if you're doing really quick, regular pulse checks, and it's just part of everyone's weekly or monthly business, you get better feedback. And if it's only 3 or 4 questions, people are not going to care about that. It's quick and accessible.
Yeah. And I guess a lot of directors are going to be worried, oh, they won't tell the truth because we're tracking who it's coming from. Okay, sure. Just use software. The software that'll keep it anonymous. They can let you know of issues. The thing is, though, I can also see the hesitation to ask that feedback. You're like, why wouldn't you? But hold on, they're going to raise the fact that the chairs aren't perfect or the steps not. They're going to create all these problems that are going to cost thousands of dollars to fix because we've now documented we've got a problem. I can see why they don't. Yes. So this is the world you live in, Abbie, of, yeah, this is what best practice would be. Like, I don't know. I guess what goes through my head here is, Abbie, when does someone need to take seriously, very seriously, it's time to change some stuff in their workplace? And when can they actually probably survive kicking this can down the road another year?
To be fair, it's legislated. This is now legislated in every state in Australia. So there's actually no time for kicking it down the road. It needs to be acted on yesterday. So, but there are lots of tools available. So it's not to say that you need to come and hire someone like me. We've obviously got the time and the experience to do it a lot quicker than other people would, but there are lots of tools out there that people can utilize to do this themselves. But yeah, they need to get onto it straight away. If you have a known hazard in your business, a known hazard that can cause mental injury in your business, you must have controls in place to manage it. So it's as simple as that. Comes down to that. So get onto it, everyone.
Imagine someone is being harassed at work, or they perceive they're being harassed.
Yeah.
Let's imagine it gets to the point where the regulator is called in. What happens next? Because I'm glad I don't know the answer to this. Okay. How do things play out? What does the director need to be anticipating or thinking through or aware of? One, so they give it due weight, but two, so they don't overfear.
Yeah. So the first thing that they're going to do is the regulator will talk to the person who's made the complaint, get their version of the story. And then the regulator goes in and speaks to the employer, the business. And all they'll do is they'll say, these are the allegations that we've received. What do you know about that? And then if this is the first time that the business is hearing about it, the regulator will say, okay, what process do you have for managing complaints? If there's not one, then the person's likely to get a notice to put in place like a grievance or a issue resolution policy. Then once that's in place, they are then instructed to utilize that policy to respond to the allegations that have been made. So it's really about forcing the company to go through the process and work out the answers for themselves. And then following that, they'll say, what other controls have you got in place to manage mental health injury or prevent mental health injury at your workplace? For that question, you're expected to know what your hazards are, what your risks are. Are your employees being isolated by having to work on their own all the time? Are they being exposed to what we refer to or what the regulator refers to as occupational violence and aggression or work-related violence? And then once you're aware of those things, you have to put in place controls. So how are you reducing that risk, eliminating or reducing that risk? And so they'll expect to see some kind of process that you've gone through to manage those things.
Okay. And how expensive is this? Because what I'm thinking is, if I ever found myself in that spot, well, the first thing is a lot of my thought time, like when you're driving, when you're whatever, is going to go to, dealing with this drama and the fear. So it's expensive in terms of the leader's time and energy and emotion. They're probably not going to be the best husband or wife for that week, right? So you've got that. And then you've also, what are the financial costs? Obviously, you've got the workflow cost. But to be honest, the embarrassment of someone walks through our front door and asks this high question. What are the financial costs or other costs?
Look, in terms of the regulator side, they can then prosecute. So depending on the severity and a bunch of other factors that mush in together, the inspectors would then refer on to our investigators and they can investigate something and take it through to prosecution. So there was a recent one that went through prosecution. It was around about $350,000 just for the prosecution. And that was after they had to do all of the other stuff before they got to that point. So it can be super expensive to get it wrong.
I get it. Okay. That's a nightmare. No one wants it. The thing is, we don't go into business going, I can't wait to start my own business so I can have my own policies and then enforce them and then end up, that went badly, and then have a staff member go to the regulator. No one really thinks like that. But yet it's the reality. And I guess at certain scales, it's going to happen. If you've got 100 staff, it's only a matter of time. If you've got 500 staff, you've already been there.
Happened.
Yeah, I get that. Abbie, I think what you're doing is just amazing for people. I think the service you offer is just ridiculously good. You and I were talking off air about our pricing. It's all right. I've got a dog too in the background. We're good. It's like every man his dog wants to be a part of this podcast. Okay. So I can see what you're doing is valuable. I can see it's important. I appreciate it, Abbie. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, they can message me and I'll put them in touch with you. Or they can find you on LinkedIn, Abbie Janssen, Janssen. And then it's like, Abbie, last question, because after such a heavy podcast, we got to end on something really positive. Okay. What are your hopes for the NDIS and allied health industry in the future? Like, where do you hope things go safety wise for people that is not currently in place?
Look, I would love for everyone to love turning up to work, because the people I've met in the NDIS space are also passionate about what they do. They don't run these businesses for no reason. I've met a lot of people who are running their businesses because of lived experience, and I want them to have really successful businesses and have happy participants and have a really happy and healthy workforce. So having this stuff in place is just going to create that culture.
I love it. And I appreciate your time. You've taught me a lot in today and also before we jumped on here. I appreciate what you're doing. You're obviously a very skilled communicator, and all those years as a regulator certainly equipped you. I think we need to have you on again sometime. Thank you so much for your time today, Abbie.
Lovely. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate your time, Michael.